It was the worst night of his life. Not because of one thing that happened. Because of everything. Because of the way years of quiet failures had stacked up like stones in his chest, until he couldn't remember what it felt like to breathe without a weight on his ribs. The kind of night that doesn't just hurt, it erases everything you ever believed about yourself. And Michael, we'll call him Michael, was standing on the wrong side of a bridge railing at 2 a.m, looking down at black water that didn't even glint because the moon had already gone. He wasn't sure how he'd gotten there. He remembered leaving his apartment. He remembered the door clicking shut behind him. The note he'd left on the kitchen counter that said nothing because he couldn't find the words. He remembered walking, the cold November air slicing through a hoodie he'd owned for 7 years. He didn't remember making a decision to stand on that bridge. His legs just stopped, and then his hands grabbed the cold metal, and he climbed. The night started 6 hours earlier. He'd lost his job that afternoon. Not laid off, fired. A mistake he'd made months ago had finally caught up with him, and his manager didn't even look him in the eye when she said it. Just slid a folder across the desk like it was routine. He walked out of the building with a cardboard box that held a plant he didn't want, a mug that said, "World's okayest employee," and a framed photo of his dog who had died 2 years earlier. On the bus ride home, he called his girlfriend because he still thought of her that way, even though she'd moved out 6 weeks before. She didn't answer. She never answered anymore. She sent a text saying, "Sorry, can't talk. Hope you're okay." He stared at the word, hope, until the screen blurred. He got home and sat on the edge of his bed. The apartment was too quiet. The lease was up in 3 weeks. He had $1,300 in his checking account and a credit card that was already smoking. He opened his laptop, thinking he'd look for jobs, but instead he just scrolled through photos from 5 years ago. A hiking trip, a barbecue, his dog at the beach. He looked at his own face in those photos and felt like he was looking at a different person. Someone who still believed the future was a promise and not a threat. At some point the sky went dark, and the only light in the room was the glow of the screen. He didn't turn on the lamp. He didn't eat. He just sat there as the hours hollowed him out, until his thoughts became a single repeating loop. You are a failure. You have always been this. You will always be this. No one needs you. No one would even notice. That's the thing about that kind of night. It doesn't hit you all at once. It waits. It lets you sit in the silence until your own voice is the loudest thing you can hear. And that voice isn't kind. It reminds you of every bad decision, every broken relationship, every time you let someone down, every moment you didn't become the person you swore you'd be. And after a while, you start to agree with it. You start to think the only logical thing is to turn the volume off permanently. At midnight, he stood up. He didn't feel like himself. He felt like a ghost watching someone else's body move across the room. He picked up a pen and a piece of paper, and he wrote the note. He didn't write an explanation, because explanations felt pointless. He just wrote his mother's name and a phone number, and the words, "I'm sorry." He put the pen down. He walked out the door. The bridge wasn't far. He'd crossed it hundreds of times in daylight, on his way to a job he'd never liked, but tolerated because it was safe. Now the pedestrian path was empty. Nothing but wind and the distant buzz of a highway. He climbed over the railing, and his feet planted on a narrow concrete lip. The water below was so still it looked solid, like if he fell, he'd hit pavement. His fingers curled around the cold steel behind him. He closed his eyes, and then, nothing dramatic, no voice from heaven, no sudden memory of a loved one's face, no stranger grabbing his arm, just a thought, quiet, almost indifferent. The thought was, what if I'm wrong? Not wrong about the pain, or the loneliness, or the sense that he'd ruined everything. Wrong about what came next. Wrong that this was the only ending available. That thought didn't save him. It annoyed him. It felt like his own brain was betraying him at the worst possible moment. But it was enough to make him open his eyes. And when he opened his eyes, he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. A small sticker on the railing. One of those vinyl stickers someone slaps on a sign or a lamppost. It read, "You are not alone. This moment will pass." He stared at it for a long time. He'd never seen it on any other bridge. He'd never noticed it on this one. Later, he would learn it was part of a mental health campaign someone in the city had pushed for years earlier. Something he'd probably passed a dozen times without seeing. But now, in the middle of the worst night of his life, it was aimed directly at him. He didn't cry. He didn't climb back over right away. He just stood there, one hand still on the railing, reading those 6 words over and over. You are not alone. This moment will pass. And something shifted. Not a solution. Not a cure. Just a tiny crack in the wall. Enough to let in a sliver of curiosity. What if this really was just a moment? What if moments actually did pass? The way pain had passed before, even when he thought it wouldn't. He thought about his dog, the one who died 2 years ago. The grief had been so heavy, he'd thought it would crush him. But he was still here. He'd still laughed at a dumb movie a month later. He'd still gone on a date, even if it ended badly. Grief had moved. It hadn't disappeared, but it had moved. Maybe this could move too. He made the decision then. Not a grand, heroic decision. Not a promise to never feel this way again. Not a vow to change his entire life before sunrise. The decision was painfully simple. He wanted to hear his mother's voice. Just once. Not to burden her. Not to explain. Just to hear her say hello. He didn't know if she'd answer. It was past 2 in the morning. She was 70, 2 years old, and slept like a stone. But he pulled out his phone, hands shaking, and he called her. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He almost hung up. Then she picked up, groggy but alert, the way mothers always are when the phone rings in the middle of the night. Michael. He couldn't speak at first. His throat locked. She said his name again, and this time her voice had an edge of fear. Michael, are you okay? He wanted to say, I'm standing on a bridge and I don't want to be here anymore. But he didn't. He just said, Hey, Mom. That's all. 2 words. But something in the way his voice cracked must have told her everything she needed to know, because she didn't ask 1,000 questions. She didn't panic. She just said, Stay where you are. I'm not hanging up. And she talked. She talked about the weather, about the stray cat that had started coming to her porch, about a recipe she'd tried and ruined, about a memory from when he was 5, and he'd gotten lost in a department store, and she'd found him sitting on a display bed, eating a cookie he'd somehow acquired. She talked until his grip on the railing loosened. She talked until his legs stopped shaking. She talked until the silence inside him was no longer screaming, but just a low hum. When the sun started to come up, a pale, gray light that barely counted as morning. She was still on the line. She said, Do you think you can come home? I'll make coffee. And he realized, with a kind of shock that felt almost physical, that he wanted coffee. He wanted to sit at her kitchen table and watch her fuss over him. He wanted to exist in that small, ordinary moment. So he climbed back over the railing. His feet hit the pavement, and his knees buckled. He sat there on the cold ground, phone pressed to his ear, and he told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. That was 3 years ago. Michael didn't become a different person overnight. The next day, he felt hollow and ashamed. The month after was a fog of therapy sessions and awkward conversations and nights when the darkness still crept in. But something was different. He had made a decision on that bridge. Not to live forever. Not to conquer his demons. He just decided to take one tiny step back from the edge. Literally and figuratively. He decided to make a phone call. He decided to hear a voice. And that one decision, small as it was, became the foundation of everything else. Because when you're in the worst night of your life, you can't fix everything. You can't solve years of pain with one choice. But you can make the next right move. Just one. And that move opens the door for the next one, and the one after that. It's not about being brave. It's not about being strong. It's about recognizing that even in total darkness, there's a sliver of light you haven't noticed yet. A sticker on a railing, a memory, a voice on the phone, and letting that sliver be enough to keep you breathing for one more hour. He started volunteering 6 months later, not on a crisis hotline. He wasn't ready for that. He walked dogs at a shelter. Something about the simplicity of it, a leash, a sidewalk, a living creature that just wanted to be near him. It reminded him that being needed doesn't always come with loud declarations. Sometimes it's just a dog looking up at you like you're the whole world. A year in, he called his ex-girlfriend, not to get back together, just to apologize for the ways he'd shut down during their relationship. She cried. He cried. They didn't become friends, but they became people who no longer carried that weight. 2 years in, he found a job he actually liked. Nothing fancy, managing inventory for a local bookstore, but he was good at it, and the people were kind. He started writing again, something he'd stopped doing in his 20s. He wrote about the night on the bridge, not for anyone else, just to get it out of his own body. He filled a notebook, then another. Then he started sharing pieces online, and strangers reached out to say they'd felt the same way, that they'd stood on their own bridges, metaphorical or otherwise, that they'd made a phone call, or taken a breath, or just sat with the pain until it eased enough to see the next hour. What Michael understands now, looking back, is that his life didn't change when he got the job, or started volunteering, or wrote the first essay. His life changed in the exact moment he decided not to let go of the railing. The moment he decided that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. That the story wasn't over. That the worst night of his life didn't have to be the last night of his life. That decision didn't make the pain disappear. It didn't undo his mistakes or bring back what he'd lost. It just kept him here. And staying here meant all the other things could happen. The coffee at his mother's table, the dog walking, the bookstore, the words on the page, the strangers who read his story and felt less alone. All of it started with a man on a bridge, freezing and exhausted, who chose to pick up a phone instead of letting go. You might be wondering why I'm telling you this. Maybe you clicked on this video because the title made you curious, or because you've had a night like that of your own, and maybe right now you're in the middle of your own worst night. Maybe you're not on a bridge, but you're somewhere quiet, and your thoughts aren't gentle. You're telling yourself the same things Michael told himself. That it's too late, that you're out of options, that nothing will ever get better. I want you to know something. That voice is lying. It always lies. It feels like the truth because it's loud and relentless, and it knows your weaknesses, but it's lying. The fact that you're still here, still listening, means a part of you hasn't bought the lie yet. A part of you is still curious, still waiting for a reason to stay. That part of you is the real you. That part of you is the one that makes the decision. Not the decision to fix everything, because you can't, not right now. But the decision to just not give up in this moment, to make the call, to text a friend, to walk into a 24-hour diner and order a cup of coffee just to be near another human being, to put the car in park and breathe for 60 more seconds, to climb back over the railing even if you don't know what comes next. Because here's the truth about the worst night of your life. It feels permanent. It feels like a verdict. But it's not. It's a night, and nights happen. Mornings happen, even if they're gray and cold and imperfect. And over time, that string of mornings adds up to something bigger than the pain. It adds up to a life you couldn't see from the edge. A life that's still waiting for you, if you can just make the decision that keeps you in it. Michael is 41 years old now. He still has hard days.